Hello and welcome back to my podcast, or if you're watching me on YouTube, welcome back to my channel. You're listening to Thrive with Elsa with me, Elsa. It's been a little while since I've recorded anything or released anything, so I do apologise, but at the moment I've just started my masters. I had my induction week this week. I think the last thing I posted was like 2 to 3 weeks ago, and by the time I even release this it might be even longer. So yeah, I do apologise. I was just before uni started, I was like, okay, I'm gonna get my head down and try to be really consistent, but then obviously things change all the time, especially now as I started my masters. I still don't have anywhere to live, and that's been a very stressful process in terms of finding a place nearer my uni in London. So most of my days has literally just been staring at a computer screen, trying to find houses and just a room to rent in with people that are maybe already found their house. Anyway, I want to ramble, but I've just spent the week in an Airbnb where I didn't really have access to buy my own food, and I was only there a few days, so even if I did buy food it just would have been a bit of a hassle, and I was at uni most of the time in my stay in London, so it's not like I was really home to start preparing food, and I already had quite a few things with me, like in terms of clothes and my laptop, so my bag was heavy. I wasn't going to then carry like Tupperware, so I wasn't preparing my meals or anything. I was buying a lot of food, and it just made me think about how much more relaxed I am around food, and how much this probably would have been an anxious time for me maybe a few years ago in terms of only being able to eat out. Or I feel like if this was me a few years ago, choosing what to eat and deciding when and what and where to eat would have been such a more stressful process, because I wouldn't have been able to be really picky and choosy about exactly what I was going to eat, because I guess when you're eating at other places you don't really have that control over how much you're going to be served and what the ingredients are or anything like that. But now those things aren't really that relevant to me, so I'm not that fussed. Like, I choose what I want to eat. I don't have to know the exact calories or the exact ingredients, or the portion sizes don't have to be perfect, because I trust myself that I'll just stop eating when I'm full. And sometimes I do overeat, and that's normal as well, but I'm a lot more flexible with my food choices and my mindset around food and my relationship to food as well. So yeah, being away and not having access to like my own kitchen and preparing my food, as I said, would have been a lot harder for me then. So I thought I'll make a video about how I kind of over the years improved my relationship to food and found a bit more food freedom. And by food freedom, I just mean that flexibility around food, and not necessarily having these like unwritten food rules that you might have in your head that stops you from eating certain things or eating at certain times or just certain behaviours. Maybe there's certain snacks that you avoid, or without knowing, maybe if you've had a sandwich early in the day, you feel like you can't have bread later on in the day, even though you want it for that. But these kind of things, and it might not seem like they're that harmful to have these like unwritten rules, or I don't know, just things that you make yourself kind of stick to. And I guess that's because some of these behaviours might seem like they're just healthy behaviours because it's advice that's being given online, or it's good for like weight loss or whatever. But a lot of the time, it all depends on the individual, but a lot of the time these behaviours and things that we feel like we should stick to mask an unhealthy relationship to food, but people don't notice it as that because it's deemed as healthy. So again, not to say that all of these behaviours are disordered or will inevitably lead to an unhealthy relationship to food or any of that, but it really depends on the individual. And for me, a few years ago, when I was refusing to ever have any chips with any meal that I was ever having, or I was scared to have a creamy pasta because it's high in fat and high in carbs, just certain things I wouldn't want to eat past a certain time, or I would remove carbohydrates from my lunch so then I could eat I had more flexibility for dinner time, kind of like saving my calories. But then what would end up happening, this is where it depends on the individual, because for me that would lead to overeating or binges like every so often. And obviously binging is not a healthy thing either. I lost all control with what I was eating because, in fairness, I wasn't fueling myself properly, or I was under eating during the day. And also restriction, whether it's physical or that dietary restraint that you have in your head that you shouldn't be eating something or you should be eating less, has been shown in research to also be a predictor of disordered eating, an unhealthy relationship to food, and moments of binging. And I think that's such an important thing to realise, that it's not just under eating, physically under eating, that causes these binges, but even thinking about restriction and controlling your intake and just that restraint around food can also lead to those moments. So this is where your relationship to food, your mindset around food, your mindset about your body and your body image is so important, because it can still affect our behaviours and our lifestyle and our mood and our well-being just as much as physically not eating enough. So if you're thinking, well, it's just in my head, I don't actually need to get it fixed, I just need to go on a diet, or I just need a bit more self-control, really take the time to realise that it's not that you need another diet, it's not that you need more self-control, it's that you really need to look at your relationship to food. And if you have all of these rules but you think it's healthy, but then you also find yourself in these negative eating loops of restriction, binging, or it's impacting maybe your social life where you feel uncomfortable to go to restaurants, or when you do go to a restaurant you order things that you really don't want but you feel like you should be having because it's the healthier option or the lower calorie option, then this video is for you basically, because I'm going to give you some practical tips that will hopefully lessen those voices that are telling you that you should be doing something. And hopefully over time, it's going to be really scary at first. I remember because I actually had an eating disorder, so you might not be at that extreme, but that doesn't mean it's not worth trying to do something about it, because we all sit on a spectrum and you don't need to be severely clinically unwell and have an eating disorder to start putting these things into practice, because they're probably still going to help you in some way. And I also created this beginner's guide to food freedom a while ago, and a lot of the points I think are really useful. So I'll be pulling and drawing some of the tips that I used in that and wrote myself. And you can, if you click on the link in the description or the episode show notes, then you can download it for free basically. And you'll also sign up to my mailing list. I don't spam anyone, I don't even have the time to do that. But you'll receive regular information on healthy habits, mental health, body image, and just things that I've been loving and enjoying. So this could be anything from books, recommendations on podcasts, foods that I've been enjoying, all of that. So definitely download the guide, and if you want to unsubscribe from me afterwards then you can, but I do think it's useful to have. Anyway, a bit of a long introduction about what the hell I'm going to be speaking about, so let's actually get into it. Okay, so the first thing that's in the guide is the idea of removing labels from the foods that you're eating. So this means not calling a salad good and not calling yourself good because you've eaten that salad. Equally, not calling yourself bad for eating a chocolate bar, not calling the chocolate bar as bad. Food in itself is not good or bad. Some foods might be higher in nutritional value. They might have more nutrients and vitamins that obviously you want to be eating a lot more of those in your diet. And there are less nutritionally dense food and maybe higher in calories. And these aren't empty calories, and they're not bad, it's just the kinds of foods that we want to be eating more of are probably the more nutritionally dense foods. But this does not mean that one food is better than the other food. Your diet is not full up of one single food. Your diet should be inclusive of a range of foods, and if you were to eat a vegetable, the same vegetable every single day, that's equally as unhealthy as eating the chocolate bar, the same chocolate bar every single day. But when we look at these food labels of, oh, that's unhealthy, oh, that's healthy, oh, that's bad for you, that's good for you, you become really reductionist and you have a very limited view on the foods that you're eating and your diet, because ultimately your health is not determined by the single meal or the single snack or the single dessert that you might have. Just because you have one dessert doesn't mean the rest of your day hasn't looked like vegetables and whole foods and protein sources and healthy fats. So really move away from labeling your foods as good or bad, because it makes you feel like that certain foods have to be restricted. And again, if there are foods that you enjoy, obviously there are foods that we all enjoy that are probably a little bit less nutritionally dense, and while we should be eating not as much of those as we should be eating those that are more nutritionally dense, doesn't mean that we have to remove them from our diet completely. Because as I said, if we look at the bigger picture, our diet should include a range of foods. And if the majority of our diet are these plant-based whole foods, and we've got a variety in, and there's loads of nutrients and vitamins, then generally speaking, we're doing pretty well. And less nutritionally dense food, even every day, is not as bad, because you've got those protective factors in place from having a generally healthy diet to begin with. And again, health isn't just determined by the food that you're eating, it's also determined by your social relationships and your mental well-being, and whether you're exercising or not. Do you smoke? Do you drink? There's also socio-economic factors that come into play that's not even your fault. So you have to broaden your perception of health and realize that that one chocolate bar is not going to make you unhealthy. Just like eating one salad doesn't make you the healthiest person alive after one salad. No one is. So if you can apply that rule to eating just one salad, in terms of like, you know that you're not the healthiest person alive after eating a salad, then what makes you think, and what makes you dramatize, and I don't know, just really have a lot of emphasis on the damage that one chocolate bar or one unhealthy meal will do for you? The consequences are not that large, especially if you have, generally speaking, healthy habits in place in your life. So yeah, definitely remove that language around the food that you're eating, to get rid of this idea that you have to avoid certain foods and remove foods from your diet. And again, just to touch on that, it's like we put morals on what we're eating, and in terms of morals as well, we come up with conclusions about ourselves based on what we're eating. How many times have you heard someone say, oh, I've been good today, because they've stuck to a relatively clean diet? And clean eating in itself is an issue, and at the extreme end we have clinical disorders such as orthorexia, where people are genuinely like afraid to eat foods that they don't consider as clean. And again, this is often masked and normalized in our society because they seem like they're doing the good thing and the better thing and the healthy thing, but it can be damaging to people's mental well-being. And even like physically, if you're only eating certain foods, there's still a risk of like malnutrition and under eating because of that. Like, just as a reminder, like, you're not a bad person for indulging in something or having something that's fried, or I don't know, just that's not what we deem as healthy. Like, it doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you a bad person for falling off your diet. And a lot of the time when people do fall off their diet, it's because their diets were too restrictive and too quote unquote clean. There is no such thing as clean really, but like, yeah. And then what happens is when people come off and fall off the bandwagon and they're like, oh, I need to get back to it, they think that they're the problem and that it's a lack of self-control. So they go back on the diet only for the same thing to happen again when a few weeks down the line, once the motivation has dropped. Or even when it comes to the weekend where there is more temptation around you, you've got a birthday party, you've got a celebration, you've got a wedding, and there's drinks and there's food that you haven't necessarily been letting yourself have during the week. And then you come into contact with it, and it's like, well, you can't stop yourself because it's there, it's available. And what happens is, in those moments, you do tend to overeat and binge and overdo it. And then once you've done that, a load of guilt and shame comes rushing into you, and then the weekend finishes, you wake up on Monday and you think, right, back on track, I need to start my diet again. And it's this loop, which is the common trajectory that many people have when they're trying to diet or when they're trying to lose weight. So this is where being more inclusive and being more flexible with your diet is so important, to avoid those moments of, oh, I need to eat everything. And that tends to come from a place of, I don't know when I'm going to allow myself to ever eat this again, because I know this is bad for me, so I shouldn't even be eating this now, but I'm eating it now, so I might as well fuck it and just keep going and eat the whole packet. Like, how many times have you, again, there's this story of like, oh, well, I've had one. Oh, well, I've had two. Well, now I fucked it, so I'm just going to keep going. So these are all just common examples of things that happen that are avoidable once you shift your relationship to food and shift that mindset, shift your language. Be aware of the language you're using around the food that you're eating. Be aware of the rules that you might be having in your head, like, oh, I'm not allowed pasta for lunch. Well, why aren't you allowed pasta for lunch? Because a lot of the time I think it comes from being scared to trust ourselves. If I wanted pasta for lunch, I might be like, well, that's quite a big lunch. Like, why would you want that? That's too much food. Like, you're going to eat later as well, and it's just going to be too many calories. It's not necessary for you. And I think for me, I used to be scared, well, if I have a big lunch, then I'm still going to want a lot of food later on, so I might as well just save those calories for later. And this is a bit of a dangerous game as well, and that came from just not being able to trust myself, because I viewed myself as someone who just eats so much and someone who is so uncontrollable around food. But what I wasn't aware of was me telling myself this and me then not giving myself the food when I wanted it, and continuously overriding my hunger made me then overeat. And me overeating would then give me the evidence that I needed to convince myself that I am an overeater and then I can't control myself around food. But what was really happening is I was setting myself up to overeat and be uncontrollable around food, because I wasn't really nourishing myself properly and I wasn't meeting my needs. So even if by the end of the day I was eating enough calories because of what I was doing in the evening, and I was even probably overeating, even though I hadn't eaten really during the day, I'd eat so much in this moment that I probably wouldn't even lose weight. Or after I'd lost loads of weight and I'd regained some weight, there was moments where I was eating enough and over, even though I was restricting throughout the day. And I was too scared to eat more at breakfast and more at lunch and be more stable throughout the day, because I thought, well, no, because in the evening I'm gonna want to overeat anyway. So I think with things like that, you just need to trust yourself a lot more and see what happens. Like, kind of do an experiment, see what happens when you eat the pasta. Are you really going to be just as hungry and uncontrollable around food having had pasta compared to having not eaten at all? Because the likelihood is that your hunger levels are probably going to be more stable throughout the day, because you've given yourself regular food and energy. So you're not like, oh my god, give me all the food, because you've gone so long without eating, and that your hunger just... And that was another one of the tips, is regularly eating every 2 to 4 hours. If you are someone who has just come out of an eating disorder, or your relationship to food isn't that great and is more on the severer end, you'll probably have to go through mechanical eating, which is eating every 2 to 3 hours, even if you don't feel hungry. Because what tends to happen in this group of people, or even if you don't have an eating disorder, again, this is so independent, but if you're constantly overriding your sensations and your internal cues, then that programming in your body, because we have signals in our body and hormones that tell us, hey, look, I'm a bit hungry, because of changes that have happened in our body. It's quite a complex system, and some people are more in tune with their internal cues than others. People with eating disorders, or people that do have these food rules, that constantly override that internal cue, because they're like, oh no, I can wait a bit longer. Oh no, I don't need food right now. Yeah, you're not really in tune with your cues. So this is where you kind of have to engage in mechanical eating, which is eating every 2 to 3 hours, which again is going to feel quite uncomfortable. But over time, the idea is that basically you regulate your hunger and your internal cues, so down the line you will be able to eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full, and this process should be, again, more regular. But for the general population, maybe if you haven't gone through an eating disorder, not to say that all of our cues are perfect either, like we do have people that are overweight and obese, and we are surrounded in an environment with foods that are highly palatable, energy dense, not so nutritionally dense. We have less active lifestyles, so our habits around food aren't necessarily perfect. So again, this advice doesn't speak for everyone, but to trust yourself more around food, eating more regularly should regulate your appetite, and if your appetite is more regular, then you won't really feel the need to go all in when you are having a meal. So this gets us out of that cycle of restriction and overeating or even binging. Hopefully that kind of idea makes sense. I know I didn't describe that well, but yeah, eating regularly, don't skip meals, try to avoid skipping meals as much as you can. Things like intermittent fasting, where you eat later on in the day and stop eating like at a certain point in the evening. Again, this approach works for some people, but not for everyone. And I feel like what happens is a new diet thing comes out and everyone hops on it and people speak about all the benefits and then everyone tries to do it. But it's one approach and one approach never fits all. So if you're someone who wakes up and you're absolutely starving in the morning but you're forcing yourself to not eat until 1 p.m, that's going to resemble some of that restrictive mindset that we covered more at the start, and that's what we kind of want to avoid. If it feels restrictive to you and it's not something that fits into your lifestyle, do not try to do it, because it doesn't work for everyone and it's not meant to work for everyone. Yeah, so try to avoid skipping meals. And again, just to reiterate, because I mentioned it but not as its own phrase, do not remove food groups. We need all food groups in our diet: carbs, fats and proteins. Again, we have diet camps, we have the low fat, high carb, we have high carb, low fat, and they're at war with each other. Apparently these guys have so many benefits, but so do these guys. So how can they both be correct even though they're both doing completely different things? And this is just another thing that's just dangerous in our society, because again, it feels like a trend and then everyone hops on it, everyone raves about the benefits, but the reality is everyone's dieting and eating habits are going to be different, and different things are going to work for other people. There is no one right way. Generally speaking, and I'm going to do another episode on this, which is just focusing on okay, what are the healthy habits in terms of our food and what we're eating, because there is a lot of noise and there are other people, say like me and maybe even more extreme than me, that are anti-diet culture. I am anti-diet culture, but as in the culture that we have in our society around dieting, because I feel like it's very focused on weight loss and certain rules that are literally just about weight rather than focusing on our health. But there are people more extreme that kind of give us guys a bit of a bad name, bad rep, so to say. I don't even know where I was going with this. Oh yeah, so I was going to say that I'm going to do an episode which just gives us a breakdown of what we should actually be doing then, if there are so many people saying so many different things and me saying, oh look, you know what, it's not that important, certain things aren't that important. Obviously there are some things that are important to do, but I'll get into those. I literally have lost my point completely. I'm so sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. I've completely lost my train of thought, but hopefully that was helpful, I guess. There are just 2 more points that I want to cover, and one of them is giving yourself unconditional permission to eat. I feel like this one's a bit controversial, because if everyone gave themselves unconditional permission to eat whatever the hell they wanted all the time, then surely it's going to lead to weight gain. And this unconditional permission to eat comes from intuitive eating, which is a style of eating, and there's proper principles towards it, and there's research that's being done I haven't like read into it entirely, and I think there are some issues with it, but I do think the premise of unconditional permission to eat needs to be understood in the context of intuitive eating, and giving yourself permission to eat whatever you want doesn't mean that you should always eat pizza and burgers and crisps and cakes whenever you want it all the time. And the misconception here is that you will want those foods all the time, and that it will inevitably lead to weight gain and unhealthy eating habits. But for someone who is genuinely listening to their bodies and looking after themselves, but also being flexible, that person is obviously not always going to crave donuts and junk food and processed foods and takeaways. This person also has an understanding of what's required for their health and to be healthy. And as an example, if you have a donut for breakfast because you really, really, really crave that donut, you're very unlikely to then crave a donut at lunchtime and then as your snack and then as your dinner, because your body naturally craves like nutrients and other foods. So this unconditional permission to eat is like, yeah, if you want the pizza, have the pizza, but just because you've had that pizza doesn't mean you're then gonna want the pizza again and again and again, and you have to trust yourself. So a lot of people, when they do have that, like, oh, you know what I'd really fancy right now, I'd really fancy a chocolate cake, but you know what, I'm not gonna have it because I'm not allowed to have it. But the chances are, if you just had it, then you'd probably not think about chocolate cake for a good while after it, because you satisfied that craving, and you know that when you want it again, you're allowed to have it again, compared to that person who maybe never is allowed to have it, and then they go to an event and they see the chocolate cake and they have 1 slice, 2 slice, 3 slice, because in their heads they're probably not going to allow themselves to do that again, or they know that it's going to be removed from their diet again. So that's where that's what like the premise around unconditional permission to eat comes from. So give yourself that permission, even when it's scary, and it will be scary at first, because you could be eating more. Like this, even not just what you're eating, but even when you're eating and how much you're eating. I think with portion sizes, say you have a sandwich and you're still not satisfied and you want to make another one, like give yourself permission to do that. Again, try it as an experiment, see what happens, because you might find that you might still be equally as hungry later on, but your body also goes through changes. Like for women, especially on our menstrual cycle, my period does affect my hunger, and I do bloat a lot more as well, but I see my body is bigger and I'm like, I've been eating so much recently, that's why I look like this. But realistically, it's my body going through these normal changes. I do have an increased appetite, and it's okay to eat a little bit more, because I know this is just like a week of my cycle and this is how it affects me, and it's not the end of the world if I do allow myself to have more. And yeah, as I said, this could be, maybe you always have breakfast at 10 because that's when you naturally get hungry, but maybe one day you wake up and you're hungrier and you're hungry a bit earlier. Give yourself permission to eat earlier. Like, it's okay to do that. So yeah, give yourself permission. Don't be too rigid on rules. Be more flexible, because our bodies do change and sometimes our needs change for numerous reasons. And the last point is to get rid of the idea that you need to earn or burn your food. And this is in relation to exercise, compensatory behaviors that make you feel like you have the right to eat food or more food. And yeah, just this language of, oh, I haven't exercised, so I'm not allowed that. Or after you've eaten quite a big meal, be like, oh, I need to burn that off right away. And there is quite a bit of messaging in the media again, where, or even things that you can do to find out, like, if you eat 1 Oreo, you need to do like 2,000 burpees to burn it off. This mindset around food is problematic. It's not the case that everything you eat gets straight away stored as fat. Our bodies require energy to just exist. Even if I was to lay in bed all day, my body is still using up energy and calories to carry out the processes of keeping you alive. So it's not that every single thing you eat needs to be used as an energy burning exercise. Not only is this a bad mindset around food, it also brings in exercise into this negative space, rather than seeing exercise for what it should be useful for your mental health, for your physical health. There are so many benefits that we all get from exercise that shouldn't really be related to just the energy that we're burning and the calories that we're burning and the food that we're burning. People that enjoy exercise and see the benefits of exercise and do it to keep fit and healthy and do it to keep them mentally and do it for their mental health tend to stick to their exercise habits more so than someone who just sees it as like a weight loss tool. And also, exercise for weight loss and burning calories is actually so effective, because if you think about, we have like 24 hours in a day. How many hours of those days do we exercise? Maximum like once, like 1 hour every day. If you're really, some people don't even do 1 hour of exercise a day. So if you're trying to compensate everything that you're eating with that 1 hour of exercise, it just doesn't really make sense. And again, obviously that's not the only reason why you shouldn't be exercising to burn calories. Like, just the nature of doing that is not a very positive or healthy one. I feel like it's a very toxic mindset, and again, it puts you in this toxic cycle, and it's probably one that would lead to over exercising, not enough rest and recovery. And obviously, if you want to see any improvements in your performance or your strength or anything like that, rest is equally as important. Obviously, the more advanced and the more intense that you get with your activity, the more that rest and recovery is important. But I used to think, oh, well, I'm not exercising today, it's a rest day, which means I really have to drop my calories. And that's not really the case at all. Like, again, as I said, our appetite naturally fluctuates. So you might actually find that on days that you're not exercising, you're not that hungry. But if you're exercising quite a lot during the week, then your appetite might stay the same. And I do recommend just eating as you normally would on that rest day. It's not going to lead to weight gain, because what kind of tends to happen, as someone who does get more intuitive with their food, you might eat more on some days, less on some days, and it kind of just like equalizes and balances out to then maintain your weight in the long term. It's not every single day you'll noticeably see changes, and sometimes you do, but like, it's so minimal. Again, I kind of lost my track of thought with this one. I can't pinpoint exactly why this relationship to exercise and this idea of like burning and earning your food is as bad as I'm saying that it is, and I'm trying to convince you that it is. But I think it just ties into everything that I was just saying before around restriction and the idea that you need to you have permission to eat all the time. Like, you don't need to earn your food. It's your right to eat food. You need to eat food to be healthy. It's a act of self-care and respect for your body, and it's necessary. Like, you need to eat even if you've rested. I think I butchered that quite a bit, but they are my main tips and my advice as someone who wants to find a bit more food freedom. I think I'm going to do a part 2 on this, because I've just thought of loads of other things that I could potentially say that would help someone, like practical tips, again, not just like mindset shifts, but actually how it plays out in your day-to-day life, which obviously I've given you some of those as well, but just other things that I've realised that I could also mention. If you did find this useful, please let me know. If you had any questions, DM me on thrive.with.elsa, which is my Instagram. Please subscribe to my podcast and my YouTube, leave a review, share this episode, share this video. If you also know that you have like any friends that might benefit from listening to this, just share it. I hope it was helpful, and download my guide. Again, the link is below. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your support. I'll see you next time.